We left off the Shiva with a fundamental question, and the question was, to repeat, what is the purpose of Tchias HaMesim? Did anyone think about it? Anyone, I don't know if you think about it at all. It's a difficult thing to, said I don't think, I don't expect you to really think about it heavily during the week, but we left the big question was, what is the purpose of Tchias HaMesim? And the reason why we asked this question, because we established last week, essentially, that the purpose of the guf, or the body, was to be a vehicle, or a keli, an instrument, where the neshama would go in, right? And the guf would serve two things. It would serve as a barrier, or mechitza, between the neshama and the banasham, so that when the neshama is in the guf, it is no longer aware of the banasham, once it's in the guf. Because it can only be aware of reality through the five senses. You see. And once you're aware of reality of the five senses, you don't know anything. So the neshama cannot know God anymore once he's in the body. So the only thing once you're in the body, can know is through the eyes, the ears, and the five senses. You cannot know anything else. So the neshama is restricted in terms of its experience by the guf. And number two, what we said also was that through the guf, since the guf is a kind of creation which is very far from the koyach, from the ha'ora, or from the light of the Bnei Shalom, it's like a neutral thing. It's very far from Ruchnius, from the spirit. So because of that, the guf therefore served as a vehicle in which the Yetzer Hara, through the guf, through the chomah, through the substance of the guf, can stimulate the person to certain desires, animal desires, which are guf desires. So therefore we see what the guf is. The guf essentially is the purpose. It's a vehicle. It's a vehicle, or keli, where the neshama goes in, and through that keli, the person chooses between the Yetzer and the Yetzer Tov what the situation is. And then after it finishes its nisyonis, then the guf separates from the neshama, and the Bnei Shalom judges the neshama whether or not it's going to go into Olam Haba or not, depending on how, what kind of avodah, what kind of choosing it had. Okay. So the question that we asked, according to that understanding, what is the purpose of Tchias HaMesim? Why does the neshama then have to go back down into the guf for a second time? Like, what tachlis does it serve? Number one. Number two, the other question was about Adam Rishon. That the Bnei Shalom said to Adam that if you eat from the Eitz Hadas, if you eat from the Eitz Hadas, you will die. So we understand from this that if he never would have eaten from the Eitz Hadas, he never would have died. Which means that death, as we know it, is not natural to the human condition. That it's possible to be human and never die. That's really what should have been. So the reason why Adam dies is because of the chet. And that's what the Gemara says that chet, or sin, comes because of death comes because of sin. That's what it says. So the shaila is why? What does one have to do with the other? Once a person, we would think that death is an important part of the whole scheme. To allow the neshama to be released, to go into Olam Haba. Okay, if you remember, this was the basic question. Okay, what is the answer to the question? Okay, Heshi over here said a little bit along the lines of it, although it wasn't the answer, but he kind of began to say the first yesod here. And obviously, the system is far more advanced than we know it. It's more complex. This question that we're asking is a very fundamental question, and there's something you have to know in terms of thinking. If you have a certain situation, right, and you have a problem with the situation, and you ask a question, a very fundamental question about what is this whole thing about? The more fundamental your question is, the further you are from understanding what's going on. You understand what I'm saying? If you understand basically the Indian, you don't understand certain details here and there, it means you understand basically what's going on, you don't understand a couple of details here and there. But if you don't understand anything that's going on, you don't understand basically what is this all about, it means that you're lacking a tremendous amount of central issues. That question is like a symptom. A question is a symptom in terms of your level of ignorance. That's what it is about this. You can look at it medically. That's essentially what it is. And a very fundamental question about Tchias HaMesim, which means the question is, why is there Tchias HaMesim? Means that we do not understand essentially what the whole thing's about. Now, you have to remember, there are two ways to ask the question, and we continue to go along the passage of thought. The first kind of question is, you do not know something. You say, why is this? What is that? That's ignorance. I'm a artist. A Tom. Well, Tom, my mother's shoes. But I mean, what is this? What is this thing? Okay. The other type of question is is a more intelligent question. I mean, they're all intelligent questions, but it's a question which has a different origin. The question is, you understand something. You understand fact A, B, C, D. And after you get to D, all this information leads you to a certain conclusion called conclusion E. And suddenly you look and you see conclusion E is wrong. So you see yourself, what's wrong here? A, B, C, D, E all led to E. You see. But E is wrong. That's a different kind of question. That's a conflict. There's something wrong. When you get to that kind of question, you realize there's something wrong with your system. You see. Now, this is very critical. There are many, many questions which are like that. And true Chachamim know how to deal with that kind of a question. Because that's the most important question. Question is, what is this about? You go, you look up, you get an answer here, this and so on. But a question about the consistency of a certain thing to a system is a much deeper question. Obviously, in order to answer the question, the instant thing is several things. There's something wrong with the system. That's the problem. There's something wrong with the whole system, with A, B, C, D, E. No, A, B, C, D. So, where is it wrong, or is there certain information missing in the system? That question is a structural question, because based on a certain system, a certain structure that you've established, something comes out that doesn't make sense. Okay. How do you answer that kind of a question? There's a number of ways. One of the ways to answer this question is to go backwards.
Examine A, B, C, D.
Yeah. Examine A, B, C, D. Now, what was the question about Tchias HaMesim? The question Tchias HaMesim comes from where? And it's very important to ask yourself, again, in Machshava, is, if I have a question, why am I asking this question? If it's a question you don't know about, you say, I don't know this piece of information. But if it's a structural question, you say to yourself, what has produced this question? This question is a conflict in what two pieces of information? You see, it's like you more closely examine, you see, the origin of the question itself. And you hopefully can see, if you know where the question is coming from, maybe you know what to correct, what not. Okay, so what's the question? The question is Tchias HaMesim. Why is there Tchias HaMesim? What is Tchias HaMesim? What's the question? Why does the Neshama rephrase it to make it easier? Why does the Neshama have to come back down a second time? You see, that's not the question yet. The question is more fundamental. Why does the person have to come down a second time? Meaning, death is sufficient. Death is an important part of our system. We understand death. Death is necessary, you see, because of what? Why is it important? So he comes back down. What's wrong? Because the question is, you see, once a person dies, it should be finished. That goes back, right? Now, why should a person die? Because the way we understand it, the neshama has one tachlis and the guf has another tachlis. And at the end of time, when it comes to the end of a person's life, the tachlis is finished. The union between the neshama of guf serves a certain purpose in time. Once that time is finished, there's no longer reason for that union. Hence, death is nothing more than the disunion or the separation of neshama and guf. Right? So that's what it says. Yet we see from Tchias HaMesim, from Adam Rishon, that this separation is not good. So the conflict is between the fact that we see from Adam Rishon that this separation should not have happened, and the fact that this separation should happen. You see? That's fundamentally what the question is. You see what I've done? We kind of go all the way back to what it is. One thing says the separation should happen, because the guf and the neshama have two different tachlis. Once they finish, separation. And the other thing says, the fact that Adam Rishon was not supposed to die, it says that there should not have been a separation. For whatever reason, we don't know. You see the thing? Conflict. Separation versus non-separation. You see what I'm saying? That's the question. That's the conflict. That keeps on doing. Okay. Let's go back to our system. And let's say the following. Let's go back to Adam Rishon. Okay, let's say for example, the smice with Adam Rishon is correct. There should not have been any separation. You see. The question is, number one, we have to find out why there shouldn't have been a separation. Right? Let's say we find out a very good reason why there should not have been a separation, X. Right? Then we're immediately faced with another problem, which is, why is there? You know what I mean? Even if we answer it, we say, the truth of the matter is there should never have been a separation. Fine, we understand that now. So then the next shaila is, so then why was there? So then why did Adam die? Why was there the separation? You see, which means that by answering the conflict, we immediately introduce another one. So we have to answer the second thing as well. You see what I'm saying? Okay. We haven't done anything yet. You see what I'm saying? We haven't answered anything yet. We haven't produced anything of substance. Yet we have a much clearer idea of the form in which our thinking will take place. Why should there not be a separation? That's the first thing. Why should there not be a separation? Well, we say there should be, because both of them have a different tachlis. The guf has one tachlis, and the neshama has another. Now, the truth of the matter is they both do have two different tachlisim, but not in the way that we've normally thought. And this is a very strange thing. I don't know why. Few people know about this, yet it's one of the most central things of all hashkafa. And it's the concept called zichuch haguf. When the Baruch Shem took the neshama, right, and he took the neshama and he put it into the guf, okay, there was a union. Adam was made. And the Baruch Shem said a very interesting thing like this. A very amazing thing. He said like this. He said, the neshama will drag the person this way, up, right, the guf with the yetzer hara will drag it down. The guf will go this way, right, the guf has certain taivas and desires that drag the person this way. The neshama drags it this way, towards avodah. The neshama with its ruchnius tries to drag the person to do avodah, to have shaykhs with ruchnius, with Rabbanu Shalom, in some way to be involved with chokhmah, with Torah, with Yiras Shamayim. The guf says, no, I don't want to be involved with that. I want to be involved. The guf says, I don't want to be involved with that. Rather, I want to be involved with material, with satisfying the pleasures of the guf, all the titles of the guf and so on. And the Baruch Shem said the very following: what happens if the person follows this way and that way? What are the consequences of the situation? That's the very thing. What are the consequences? Up to now, we've thought the simple thing. The consequence, if the person follows the neshama, he gets Olam Haba. Simply, right? You see. But that's a tremendous oversimplification. What happens is really the following. You remember we said that the neshama is created. We said that the neshama was created with a chson. It's not mushlam. It lacks a certain or. It has existence and has a certain level, but it doesn't have the full or. Right?
50 pounds.
50 pounds. There's a very strange thing about the neshama. You know what happens if the Baruch Shem would have taken a neshama with full 100 pounds of light in it and put it into the guf? I mean, I would have a power. If the neshama would have been Muslim, right? Really, had all that ruchnis in it, Muslim, and then he put it into the guf. You know what would have happened?
Would have no use for the guf.
Well, we would have a use for the guf, right? Because he has shleimus already. But you know what would happen to the guf? It would have changed. How? Yes. That's right. The substance of the guf would have become ruchnius. It's incredible. That body which you are all in now, I mean, what shaykhs have to ruchnius? If the neshama had its full light into the thing, it would have taken the substance of the guf and elevated and raised it up. And it would have taken the substance and be what's called mazach. Zichuch means to purify. Shemen zoch. Pure olive oil, no? It would purify the guf to such a way where it's like a filtering process. And that light would have taken everything, the fingers, the whole guf and so on, and suddenly the substance would have changed and it would have turned into a ruchnistic thing. With the same tzura, except the substance would have become ruchnis. That's the power that neshama has. It's called zichuch haguf.
But the guf is not the problem.
Energy is flying by fire. And
what's that?
What can we relate to in terms of substance of what it is?
Okay.
We see matter around something called energy. We don't but we know it's there in the top. Is that like an example of it?
Hold that question, okay, for a second, because I'll put that in a second. Do we understand this concept of zichur? Zichur means that the awe of the neshama, the spirituality, would have purified it, the guf, so that the substance itself would have become less gross. It's like taking ice into water vapor. The steam, it melts, it becomes water, and the water evaporates and becomes a gas. So the same thing changes in terms of the solidarity of it, you know what I mean? In terms of how thick it is, you know what I mean? Or in terms of its, its solidness. Do you understand? This is a mushal.
Okay, so what
The form.
Someone who is mashal is a shaman, so it doesn't happen gradually, so suddenly it becomes 100.
Okay, wait a minute. Good. What the kavanah was of the Bonasham was that he said to the neshama that if you do follow your neshama, and therefore when you do a mitzvah, every time you do a mitzvah, a light will come down. You see. Bonasham takes the neshama and makes it mechusa, puts it in the guf, and he says the following: as you do each mitzvah is koina an or, a light, a spiritual koyach. And when that koyach comes to the neshama, what happens is it works on the guf, and the guf begins to change its form. You see, it becomes more and more ruchnius. Until finally, when the neshama has koina all the light, all the ruchnius, which is its state of being shalom, when it's complete, the guf will be a pure ruchnistic being. Together, and together they will go into Olam Haba. The tachlis is for the guf to join the neshama in Olam Haba. Meaning that the person is supposed to remain as a guf. The kavanah of the Bonasham, okay. The kavanah of the Bonasham is not. When the Bonasham took the neshama and put in the guf, his kavanah was to make this a union, l'neitzach nitzochem. He never wanted this to separate this union, but that it will be the tachlis of the person to be mezachich the guf, purified, so that he goes into Olam Haba like this, straight with your guf, right into Olam Haba. That's called zichur haguf.
Why did the Tzaddik want the guf to go into Olam Haba?
Okay, let's examine this more closely. And we're going to get a much better understanding of what Olam Haba is. When the neshama goes into the guf, right? When it goes into the guf, the way the guf is created now, it has a certain substance. It's gashmistic substance. It's a low level, it has no ruchnis, it's like a neutral thing, right? When the neshama is in the guf, no ruchnis is felt. The guf constitutes glass. It's like glass, black glass. You see, or it's like, it's like opaque. You know what opaque glass? Which you cannot see through. Okay. When lights come down to neshama, when a person does mitzvahs, and the neshama becomes what's called nizdaher, it becomes brighter and brighter in its ruchnistic koyach, by being koyach more and more perfection, shlemus, and becomes more and more complete. It takes the guf and changes the glass from opaque to transparent. That's what it does. It's not that the guf actually becomes ruchnius as such, but rather the guf no longer serves as a barrier to ruchnius. So once the guf is like glass, the neshama can feel ruchnius coming right through it.
No, there is ruchnius of the world, except it can't go through.
Right, exactly. In other words, it's like ruchnius is always coming down, but we can't feel it because we're in a case of opaque glass, so we cannot feel any ruchnius. Although the ha'oros are always coming down. It is the job of the person, by doing mitzvahs, to be mezachich this guf, change the transparent glass, and suddenly we feel the whole thing. So therefore what we see is a very interesting thing, and when we feel that the person has the capacity to feel all the ruchnius of Olam Haba. Do you understand what I've just said? That's zichur haguf.
Yeah, but when the body is put into earth, nothing is left of it.
What's that?
When the body is put into an earth.
We didn't get to that. We haven't established it right. That's the next one. Why do you have to die, Taka? But until that, can you understand this? Now, the next principle, very critical. Where is Olam Haba?
Some people say.
Well, I'm not even what some people say. Where is Olam Haba?
Where are the neshamas?
Gan Eden.
That's where Olam Haba is.
Oh, so you say Olam Haba is up there somewhere.
Wherever
that
Eden
is. Any other?
What did you say?
I said where the neshamas are.
That's the ship.
So,
After the person dies, the neshama goes to Gan Eden.
so that's where Olam Haba is. That's it.
That's Olam Haba.
Maybe it's here. Maybe it's here.
Why is? Any other opinions? You want to say why should it be here?
That's wrong.
Why should it be at Yisrael? How could Olam Haba be here?
Because
it was given over here for the person.
But where is it, Olam Haba?
you can't see it.
Can't see Olam Haba.
Yeah, we can't see it because our guf is not purified in order for us to see it.
So let's say you purify it, still you mean Olam Haba, you have this house here, it's going to be part of Olam Haba.
Well, then this house is going to look different.
Why should it look different?
Because you will perceive it differently. Your neshama will perceive it differently.
What takes up space?
The truth is, okay, Olam Haba is here. Why? How can Olam Haba be here? What shaykhs does this world have to Ruchnius? To the Ha'ora, the Kabbalah of Ruchnius.
Everything is here. The person is here. I don't have words for that, but it's close to the answer.
Look outside.
You can feel it.
The neshama. So let's say.
Because the Baruch wanted to do hat toivet.
Ken, how do you feel?
Wanted to do the Baruch wanted to do good for the people, so he created a world where a lot of good is here. And the only thing is that we cannot see the goodness because we are busy with other things.
1 second. Can you let's say for example the person is mezach guf. Fine. So he gets all the auras, right? Where are the auras coming down? From somewhere up there. They come down like sun rays from the sun, right? Okay, so he says, what does that have to do with here? Let's say he walks out in the street, right? He looks around, right? He walks out in Ballpark on 13th Avenue. And look, this is the Olam Haba.
I told you that.
He's feeling great purpose, right? He's feeling ha'ora, right? Because his guf is in zuch. He's feeling ha'ora. What does that have to do with, how could that be in 13th Avenue? What? Maybe 14th Avenue.
He says it's in Seagate.
It's the house.
No, it's here. We just don't see it because of the state of our guf. It is here, except we don't see it. Is there horror? Is there horror coming down? Is there horror coming down on the wall?
Yes.
Okay, can we see it?
Yes.
Can we see it right now?
Yes. Now, no.
Okay, so the same way we can see Olam Haba. It's Hainach. The minute that you will see the horror coming down, you will see that this is Olam Haba.
Yeah, but even if the guf becomes like glass, the world doesn't become like glass.
But it doesn't matter. You will
The
see.
world is like the same Gashmi as the
you-
Olam
the-
Haba.
Just being native is everything. What's the difference where you are?
Okay. The answer is the world becomes glass, not only the person. When the Buddhism created the guf, it's not only the guf. You have to remember, what is the guf composed of? The guf is composed of the elements, right? Carbon, oxygen, hydrogen, organic elements, right? It's composed of the basic elements. These elements are part of the world. Everything is composed of those elements, right? When we see that the neshama is going to mazach the guf, what it means that the neshama has the koyach with its oil to be mazach the bria. It has the koyach mazach everything which is created. All the 92 elements, wherever they are, suddenly become pure. So everything which is made of everything suddenly becomes like glass to ruchnias. So therefore, what happens is this world becomes Olam Haba.
That's why there wasn't supposed to be any separation by Adam.
Wait, you see what I'm saying? This whole world, this whole matzah becomes Olam Haba. This is where it is, except it doesn't exist now. It's Haba. It's a world to come. Why doesn't it exist now? Because mankind has not completed his shleimus. He hasn't taken down the Zoris. He wasn't Mezach his guf. But Zichar guf means Zichar of the Bria. You see, where the entire world is lifted, where the substance of the entire Bria is lifted, and it becomes Ruchnius. So the person can walk around this world and receive Urus from the entire Bria. All men could be, whatever the story, do you see what I'm saying? And this is where he lives.
The
highest state of
Yes. What's that?
the substance that becomes.
Yes.
Like you said.
Yes. Become glass. Become like glass, which means that the substance becomes extremely pure. Obviously, it's filtered out. The impurities are filtered out of the thing. You see.
Yeah. You mentioned the Bria and how it's in terms of levels of Bria, and with the Neshama being far above Chilus, whatever.
This world goes right up with them. Yes. It means the glass becomes so fine that the ore, only up to the highest world, can shine light through it without problems. You see. That's what Olam Haba is, and that's what the Banishim says. The Banishim says to Adam, he says, here's the tool. He said, I've created you a union, an eternal union. Your neshama will never leave your body. So the neshama says, if it's not going to leave my body, so how am I going to ever get up to Olam Haba? The guf is Gashmias. How am I going to get to Oris? So the Banishim says, I have solved that problem for you. If you do your avodah, if you work and you do your mitzvahs, you will be kind of a shlemus Oris. That all will give you the neshama nizdaya, like a tremendous radiance. And that radiance was the Zehiris. Radiance will take the guf and transform it into glass. So that all these Oris, everything from Olam, and this will become Olam Haba. So all the Oris, you see, which I have to give you in Olam Haba, you can get right in that guf. You don't have to go anywhere. I'm not asking you to go somewhere. I'm asking you to be something. That's all. This is where it's at. This is your matzav. You see what I'm saying? That's the kavanah of the Banishim. And that was the meaning of Adam. If Adam had not done the chet, if he had done the mitzvah, the light would have come down each, as he didn't do the mitzvah, didn't do the avera, and slowly his guf, he would have noticed the change in his guf, and the whole Gan Eden around him. Gan Eden was the world that he had.
So when it says in the Pasuk that he put a lock or on Gan Eden, that means that he changed the substance of the world?
Well, get into that. Wait a minute.
I think it's also important.
Something happened, something more. But this was the theme. You see what I'm saying? The Banishim says, if you keep this mitzvah, and you will... Now, why is it like that? Think of it for a second. We said that the fundamental purpose of this Bria is Tikkun Nam L'Ksufa, that the man has to earn his own thing, right? Now, is there any bigger way than man to earn it by actually creating his own Olam Haba? Do you see what I'm saying?
But what do you
the Banishim is not saying, you do this and I'll give you Olam Haba. He's saying, you do the mitzvah and you will create your own Olam Haba. Because you will make your guf in the glass, mazachach it, and then you will receive what I have to give. But it will be directly due to your efforts. Do you see what I'm saying? You are the one who's responsible for your situation. And you're cleansing it. The more you cleanse the thing, the more you're zoicha to. I don't have to interfere with you. Yes, that's it. Now, so when we said last time that where's the obstacle? We said if Olam Haba is a perception that a person is aware of the Banishim, and that's the Hana. So you can put the obstacle in the awarer, in the active awareness, or in that which you're aware of. So we said it's not in that which you're aware of. The Shekhinah is the same, but it's in the person and in the active awareness. The person is in a situation where he's not shalom, he's not complete, so therefore he cannot see. You see, he cannot see for two reasons. He cannot see because he basically cannot see. Why? Because he doesn't have because there's a barrier between him and what's seeing. The world, his body. And as he builds himself up, you see, he removes the barrier and the active perception becomes clear. You see what I'm saying? He creates the active perception. He creates the ability to see Olam Haba. Or he creates the ability to be nenef in the Shekhinah, to see the Shekhinah, because he creates. It's like you have glasses with black paint on it. He scrubs off the black paint and suddenly he sees. You see? But he has the glasses.
That's indirect. He's moving the cool, creating the condition.
Yes. Yeah.
He's not creating...
So that's directly a result of his efforts.
So what was the reason that it's a harm?
Now, there's one more problem here.
Before we get to the initial problem,
one more problem.
Is there one point? Do you have any comment to make in regard to the element of the group in the world being a receptacle, talaf from the neshama, as mentioned in the Parak Gimel of Derech Hashem?
Will it be what?
The Ramchal mentioned a reason for the goof being together with the neshama. insofar as the neshama needs a lakabel of its own to mishtalim itself by being native to it.
Oh, he says that?
In the Chelik Aleph.
I don't know. I'm not going to comment on that. Shaila is a big shaila on that. I'm not going to go into
But it's also addressed in Das Tvunos.
Yeah. Now, the shaila is this. Why do we see this? In a basic, why is this necessary? It fits Namlik Sufa very well, right? But the question is, why is all this necessary? Does the neshama really need the guf? Does he really need it? Do you mean?
After the cleansing period.
Yeah, after cleansing. I mean, the truth is, why can't the neshama? Why can't there be death? Why can't there be death? You know what I mean? Why can't there be a situation when the person does that and the neshama goes somewhere else and gets hana? Why does it have to change olam hazeh into olam haba directly? You see what I'm saying? Why does that have to be that way? So, essentially, they give two answers to it. First of all, since the guf is involved in a certain sense in the avoid itself, the Banishim also wants to reward the guf. But there's a very fundamental answer why, which I think is a very fundamental thing also. Let's take two people, okay, two different people, and let's say one person was a tzaddik, a very big tzaddik, and the other one was a Beinani, a regular guy. Meaning in terms of the amount of mitzvahs he did, right? Okay, let's think along our own lines. What therefore is the difference between the two neshamas after toward the end of their life?
How much shukran is all received?
Yeah. What's the difference between the neshama of a tzaddik and the neshama of a...
The guf is...
Forget about the guf. I'm talking about the neshama.
Receive the Rebbeinu Shalom more.
Why? What does it have?
It has rectified the Nam B'Tzufa to a better level than the other ones.
The neshama of a tzaddik has many more oris than the neshama of a Beinani. You know what I mean? It's much more powerful. Its yiruchnis is much more powerful, right? Than a Beinani. Right? Which, if you look at both the neshamas of a tzaddik and of a Beinani, since one did much more mitzvahs, he brought down more light. He has much more shleimus, you understand, than the other one. So if I would look at these two neshamas, which one would be much brighter to me, or much more radiant? The tzaddik. But you understand why? If one neshama is more radiant than the other, how does that affect the guf?
It's less certain, it's less clean.
Less zichuch.
When?
Less zichuch. If you have the neshama of a tzaddik and the neshama of a Beinani, which neshama is more radiant? Because it has more awe, it's more musham. How does that affect the process of zichuch, of the guf? What?
It's not fully transparent.
I can't hear you. What?
It's more.
What's more?
Guf is more is higher. It's like
Yeah.
further away from Gashmi.
Okay, then what? Then the...
Beinani.
Oh, how does it therefore affect its olam haba?
The way it's going to see it, that has since it's more visual, it sees it and clearer and more bright.
So that will make the difference between different people in olam haba.
It still doesn't answer the question.
The way it's going to see it is
Doesn't answer.
The guf constitutes the standard measuring rod which each one will have in olam
That
haba.
doesn't answer the question.
Wait a minute, one second. You understand what I'm saying? In other words, a tzaddik who went through mitzvahs a great deal, was over tremendous amount, and has tremendous ovis, will mezachich his guf, so that it's a kind of glass, pure glass, where he can receive a tremendous amount of light. The Beinani will have been mezachich his guf, you mean, to a much less extent. So therefore, a much less amount of light can go through. Why? Because of his own efforts. You see what I'm saying? In other words, the guf is that which will distinguish between one neshama to another. So therefore, that which you work at, that's how much you earn directly. You are directly responsible for your quantity of olam haba.
Yeah, but
You see what I'm saying? Directly. The more mitzvahs, the more ha'ora, zichuch. The more zichuch, the more hasagal ne'emishchina. So that each one therefore creates. So therefore, one second. So therefore, first get this concept. When different people get to olam haba, the Rebbeinu Shalom judges them. All they have to do is, they're in their guf, and to the extent that they're that's chelik of olam haba. The more you have zichut, the greater your olam haba. But let's say you take a person who's a rasha, right, and does almost no mitzvahs at all, right. So therefore, its neshama will have how many oiros? Almost none. So what will happen to its zichuch? Nothing. So therefore, the neshama, the Rasha cannot go into Olam Haba, because how is he going to perceive anything? So the Rasha destroys himself.
Or Gehenna.
Wait a minute. Leave Gehenna. Do you understand what I'm saying? You know what I mean? Because he has, so therefore, what the punishment, therefore, there is a minimal amount of mitzvahs, X, we don't know, that a person has to perform in order to mazach his guf to the minimal level where the least amount of light of Olam Haba can go through in order to stay there. If it's less than that minimum, he cannot go to Olam Haba, and he destroys himself. What? He doesn't destroy himself, but he can't, he has no mokum Olam Haba, he's nevad. The Rebbeinu takes him out of distance because he has no shaykhs to that moilam. You know, because he has not developed his eyes or the glasses to any extent in which you can see it. There's
no purpose for him to stay around.
There's no purpose for him to stay around.
But
you understand this thing? So therefore, when we ask ourselves, what is the purpose of Zichur Haguf? What the purpose of the guf is? The guf, you see, the punishment could have done it two ways. The punishment would take a number of different neshamas, and depending on each neshamas he gets out, he could have stopped the amount of light coming down. But he didn't do that. What he really did was send down a tremendous amount of light to everyone, and each one is distinguished by how much he could receive. You see, the punishment does not withhold on how much he's mashpia, on how much he gives. Rather, each person determines what he will receive, and that is the most ultimate form of Na'am L'Ksufa. Because what is Na'am L'Ksufa? Na'am L'Ksufa means you are responsible exactly for what you do, and fundamentally, the greatest control you have is what you receive. You see, if I'm to control what the Banishim gives, then in some way I'm controlling him. You see, the Banishim doesn't want that. He says Na'am L'Ksufa means that you yourself must be responsible for what you get, which means that you have total control of what you will receive. So, what can distinguish that? The guf. By putting a thing which is a barrier between him and thing, and letting each person undo that barrier according to the amount of his work. In essence, each one creates his basic limitations and his stature in Olam Haba.
It's filters through.
Yes, filters through. Right. Exactly. You see what I'm saying? So that's Zichur Haguf.
So instead of creating another entity and Russia will put the neshama there, he puts out the maximum and everybody perceives.
According to what he's mazach the guf, according to the amount of light.
Instead of creating a different entity and then putting a tzaddik into this here and
because what it is, you have the glass. Sometimes glass. The person is born with opaque glass. Opaque. The person works it up. Some people will work it up to transparent, but there's a madrega in between called translucent. You know what I mean? Means like you ever see the glass of a shower. Sema, you can see light to it, but you can't see anything else to it. You know what I mean? So there are many levels between opaque to transparent, and the amount of zichuch of the guf, or the amount of transparency, depends on the avoid of the person.
The big gray area.
Yeah. And that distinguishes. What?
Some level of Kashmir will still exist there?
No level. In Olam Haba, obviously, no one can go into Olam Haba without the minimum amount.
Which means no Gashmi that you know.
No at all. It cannot be that, as we know it. There are many madrigas of ruchnius, right? Yeah. The Banishim has established the minimum amount of ruchnius in Olam Haba, because in Olam Haba has no Gashmis at all. So it's all ruchnius. But there are many levels of it, you see. So there's a minimum.
Yes. Does it come from the fact that there's still some Gashmis?
No. There's no Gashmis as such. It comes from the fact that in terms of a much higher level, you know. Now there's a minimum amount, you know. If you're below that minimum, if a guy's a Rosh Hashanah, then he can't have Shach Olam Haba. If he's above that amount, you see.
So each person will see that this guy is, so to say, receives more, and this neshama, this group receives less.
Yeah. I have one question on your idea, your basic idea. If that's the case, these are the mechanics. Then why is it necessary for the state of Olam Haba to retain the transparent glass into the world to be, as it were, also transparent glass? On that idea,
I don't understand your question.
I didn't finish the question. See, on the idea that the person creates his Olam Haba by lightening the darkened obstructions that the group and the world are, till one reaches the point of ultimate transparency. So they serve. So that means that the group and the world serve as a means function in the avodah. That does not, to me, seem to explain their necessity for hanging on in the Zman and Malkum of Gemul. What function do they serve? Remove the transparency. So remove the glass. It's transparent. What does it serve?
What you want?
In other words, it was an obstruction. You have removed the obstruction. You have taken the blackened suit and you've made it transparent.
Yeah.
So you've created the condition by which you can now experience the ha'ara. So what further purpose or enhancement does the goof of the world now serve?
Okay.
Only if it's not completely. But what if it is completely? What do you mean?
If it's complete,
No.
what
Because
further?
we say what we want.
It's vestigial.
No. That's what I said the last 15 minutes. What I was trying to say is this: is that the reason why we want that because we need something to distinguish between the different levels of Olam Haba, and what distinguishes them is the different levels of Zichuch. That's what makes the distinction.
That's only as a result of man's imperfection. If so, facto, that level of obstruction of the goof, of the darkness, will remain because he hasn't perfected it. But for those people who have, it's an Ign Gemurah. Why do they have to retain the goof?
What? I mean, for ultimate...
It's mashma that the goof and the shama are united, as you said, in regards. I say that the idea that you presented is valid, but is not complete.
So Tzaddik with the moon, you mean? Why do they have to retain their goof?
Correct.
Because the goof serves as the ultimate thing which differentiates between all people, including Tzaddikim. Except that in
The Tzaddikim
Tzaddikim...
at that point are not concerned with blowing their horn. We are Tzaddikim Gemurah. You are not.
But it doesn't matter. The point is the goof serves as... The goof at that point serves as no... There is no obstacle whatsoever.
It now serves as a receiver all of the
but as a general principle, the goof serves as a general principle to distinguish between different neshamas. As a general principle. And that's what it does. It distinguishes tzaddikim for everyone else also.
Does it enhance, serve a part in the process of the hano and the ha'ara itself?
The actual hano?
According to this idea, no.
Not clearly, no. Not necessarily.
I would say that it serves.
It does,
I would take your idea.
No, it does. No. It does. The more you all you zercha to, the bigger the hanoah. Of course it does.
It only indirectly, negatively speaking, because it's transparent. There's no ikuf.
But that's all.
So why to take it away completely?
Who?
If there's no ikuf, take it away.
Yeah, but
it only seems to serve the purpose and function.
You can't
in means, not an end.
But as a
we're talking about
end. But as a general principle. The Baruch Hu wants that which will distinguish among all peoples of all brias, you see. And
it's only where distinction is required. Where happens where distinction is not required?
Because even there are many levels.
Problem.
There are many levels of tzaddikim.
You don't think it's a legitimate problem?
No, because there are many levels of tzaddikim. You see, the only tzaddik that can entirely dispense with his goof is one who has a chain, is a total tzaddik gama with no total. What is that? One or two? I mean, what are we dealing with? Where the rest of mankind need the goof to distinguish between the madregas. There are many levels of tzaddikim also. The Baruch Hu wants, he constructed a scheme in which there's something can distinguish between all peoples. From
that's the case, then you have to say in your idea that it's not transparency because you gave me the misimpression that transparency is universal. Once you reach that madrega of transparency,
no,
it's okay.
The levels of transparency.
What we have to say at this point is
many madregas of
that it's very, very particularized.
Yes, I said this. It's levels of transparency. Each person is mezachtiv up to his level of transparency, and that level of transparency allows a certain amount of road to go through, which gives them the anoah. There's also distinction of many tzaddikim. Tzaddikim also differ, right? You have tzaddik gomo and tzaddik she'ena gomo, many levels of tzaddikim, right? Each one also has a different level of zichor. So each one is zichor to a different level of olam haba. We need something. It's very simple. We need something which... Wait a minute. We need something which will distinguish all people, for all madregas, and something which is directly an act of the person himself. You see, the goof serves that purpose. You see, it serves that purpose because the goof is something which, depending on how much purification it has, will limit the amount of oil coming down and therefore the amount of hana, number one. So it will serve as a divider or differentiator of all people, number one. And number two, since the goof, or the cleansing of the goof, is totally depending on the person, on the recipient, on the mushpa. It's something which is totally in his act. The Baruch Hu doesn't have to be mashpia according to different madregas. He doesn't have to say, I'm going to give this hashpor here, and a little more hashpor here, and a little more hashpor.
According to the person himself was created.
Yes, right. The Buddhism doesn't have to withdraw or quantize his hashpor. It's not necessary. He gives one hashpor, the maximum. And the amount of hashpor that you get depends on how much each individual quantized his mushpa.
Yeah.
That's where the quantification comes. The subjective quantification comes from the mushpa, not from mashpia. Why? Because that which the mushpa does directly is much more closer to Namlik Sufa than that which the mashpia does.
With the idea that you have to create your step.
Yes, right, exactly. And the guf serves these purposes. You know what I mean?
It's not like like a leftover from.
It's not a leftover. It has its purpose to quantize the shpor of Olam Haba in terms of the mushpa, and the guf does a beautiful job. You see what I'm saying? So we all understand this. I'm asking all of you to chiddush.
Go to the next question.
There's just a couple of...
I'm sorry, what's that?
No, there's just a couple of things that still have to be answered.
There's a lot of things that right. So therefore, we see that Rebbe did not want that.
We all understand for the next question.
Now we come to the next question. Eba Zoi.
Okay, so now we understand why Adam Harishon didn't have to die.
Yes. We understand that why not he didn't have to. The Rebbe didn't want him to die.
Right.
Death is not part of the scheme.
Right.
You know, if the Buddhism doesn't have to make you die, the Buddhism is not concerned with death. The Buddhism is only concerned with whether or not you're going to get Olam Haba or not. And whether you see, people get a mistake. People think that the Buddhism is concerned with taking you out of Olam Hazeh. He's not bothered with that thing. The Buddhism simply wants to know whether or not you can fit into Olam Haba. Whether you can fit into Olam Haba depends on your Zichuch HaGuf. You see what I'm saying?
One second.
Death is totally alien to the whole situation. It's alien, it's not necessary.
So people who
There must be a point where all the Nisyon stops.
Yeah.
So there has to be a time. Okay, up until now was the time to Nisyon. It's now, whatever you did in the past.
Yes.
There has to be a stopping point.
Yes, there will be. There's a stopping point.
So what happens? What happens to all?
Man Kavua.
One second. What happens to the neshamas of people who passed away? Big tzaddik. What happened to the neshama Moshe Rabbeinu? He's not an Olam Haba. Where is he now?
But I can't. We're not going to answer you. But it depends on what happened by Misa. We didn't answer that question. It's after. No. Of course, obviously that's what the Banishim wanted. But the Banishim said, if you eat from the Eitz Hadas, moistimson. So the shaila is Vusidah. What is moistimson? That's the shaila. So now, before we didn't understand why a person should not die. Now we don't understand why a person should die. What is death now?
We know this side of the equation.
Yeah.
We don't know that
Now,
side.
so the shaila is, so what is the purpose of death then? What was the klal of Misa? Why did the Prince said you have to die? Do you understand? You know what I mean? What do you need this for? Yeah.
Like all the Neshama that died, the Shkusim that died already, we're all hanging around waiting.
That's what I am.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to get to that. I'm not going to. No, you're jumping too fast.
Waiting for what?
Waiting for what?
Are they here already?
I'm not going to answer that. Well, I'll get to that in a second. You're not asking it well. You see, you have to look at it. The question that you have to ask now is, fine. Since we see that the fundamental thing that the Banishim wants is Olam Haba, and we see you accomplish that with Zichuch HaGuf or not, so death has no importance in this Priya. So the shaila is, why do people die? And if they die, what happens to the Neshama and the Guf? Like, what happens to this stuff? Where does it go? You know what I mean? That's okay. That's the next one.
What's the alternative?
Then obviously the neshama is separate from the guf. The guf, the ground, the neshama goes up. What happens to it? Where does it go?
So the Neshama will only track a certain amount of...
Well, we have a problem with the alternative also, don't we? What would happen if Olam Haba was being experienced immediately?
Let's get into Misa.
Okay, one second. We are. One second. Hold. Meanwhile, we're still working on the one neshama, right? We only have one neshama.
Yes, I only have one neshama.
Okay, we have only working on one neshama.
Yes, right.
All right.
Yeah. We have only one neshama, right? We have Adam Arishin, who's one neshama.
Right.
Okay. So the Adam, it's okay. That's
we're only working with one neshama.
Is this clear to everyone up to now? It's okay. Is it clear? Does anyone have big problems with this?
If the intent at the beginning though was without death in mind,
Yeah.
the Eitz HaChaim, what was the face of the Eitz HaChaim?
Good. Okay. We'll get to that.
History.
Eitz HaChaim said, if you eat from Eitz HaChaim, you're going to live. But if it was intentionally not going to
Obviously, he wasn't supposed to die. You're living without eating from the Eitz
He was
HaChaim.
living before he ate it.
Who?
He was alive before he ate it.
Yeah, but it's the intention of the whole Bria. It was not, death wasn't part of the Bria at all.
Okay.
And what is
So
that?
obviously
What
we
is
have
that, the kind?
now we've answered our question.
Is
really,
it 8 is real and 8?
we'll get to that. Hold on.
Stefan was toen.
It was an 8. Okay, we have this understanding, okay? Now, so the shaila now, why death? That's the kasha. Why death? What is the purpose of death? Death comes from the other side of the equation. We said that when the Banishim said to the person, he put the neshama into the guf, right? And he said, here's the two, you have two directions to go. You can go in the direction of the neshama, or you can go in the direction of the guf. We explored one of those directions. What happens if the person goes in the direction of the neshama? He's kohen oros, he's mezach to the guf, right? Now, what happens if he doesn't go in the direction of the neshama, he goes in the direction of the guf? What happens then? See. Let's understand this.
Nama de Ksufa is not rectified.
But is there any other big effects that happen? Well, first of all, let's understand this.
It darkens a lot, right?
Two things happen. If a person becomes mezucher, if a person does a mitzvah, two things happen. There are two things. There's the neshama becomes zohir, the neshama itself becomes more light, right? It attains a radiance. It's said to be what's called nizdahir. It becomes more radiant. And the guf becomes zichor. Two things happen. You know what I mean? Fine. What happens in the reverse? What happens if a person has a chet? You see. So what happens is similar. Also two things happen.
It's cloudy.
What happens is, number one, if a person has a chet, then he becomes dovek, or instead of becoming dovek to that light, instead he becomes dovek to that spiritual koyach, you see, which is called the Yetzer Hara, the Sifra Achra. And what happens is, that spiritual koyach then comes over him to his neshama and covers the neshama. The neshama itself becomes clouded, or in a certain sense, becomes clouded, or the neshama itself, that's number one.
Puts an additional layer.
It puts in a certain layer of tumah on the neshama itself. Number one, that's called klipa. A klipa means a shell, you see. It means a shell. What happens is, if a person does a chet, by doing the chet, he draws in that other koyach, that other ruchnitik koyach which the Banishim created, which is called the Yetzer Hara, and that the ruchnitik koyach comes into the neshama and like covers it or contains it. That's called a klipa. That's number one. And number two, the second damage that it does is something also. It also enters into the guf, and it takes the guf and lowers it even further.
So it puts in more chemical instead of...
You see what I mean? Two things. So the guf, the substance of the guf, which before was simply neutral, now becomes tomei. It actually begins to take in some of that tumah, you know what I mean? Or some of that koyach of the Yetzer Hara that goes into the guf itself. So the guf itself, the substance, descends a lower madrega with a certain impurity.
You want to mention the third element of usurping the
No. You see what I'm saying? That's what happens. Now, there's a big problem. That's what it means. Chazal say that the Nochash hittel bo zoyama. Do you ever see this Chazal? That's what it means. That when Chava did the chet and Odom, the Nochash hittel bo zoyama. The Nochash projected a zoyama. Zoyama means something which is soiled or tomei. That's what it means. It means that the Yetzer Hara, by the person doing the chet, instead of becoming dovek to the Bnei Shalom, right? If he did the mitzvah, he becomes dovek to the Bnei Shalom, right? Because that's what a mitzvah is. A mitzvah means trying to bring the Bnei Shalom into your being, right? So the all comes down. If he's not dovek, so he goes the other way, he's dovek against that. He's dovek to Yetzer Hara. I'll explain later on what that means. Okay? But there's a dvekus Torah. That dvekus clouds the neshama and lowers the substance of the guf, so that what happens is the entire guf itself becomes tomei. You see, with impurity. Not only the guf becomes tomei, but the whole world becomes tomei. The bria itself becomes tomei. You see what happened? Okay.
So
now,
in addition to the guf itself, also the world has an additional.
Yeah, the world and the guf are the same thing. When you mazachis the guf, you mazachis the bria. If you matama the guf, you matama the bria. It's the same thing, because the guf and the bria are from the same elements. It has a way of working on both. You see what I'm saying?
The Masil Shur means the first paragraph says when you do good, you masal the goof, masal the oil.
Yeah. Any problem? Any question? Okay, that's the thing. Okay, now what's the problem therefore? Because the problem is very critical. Let's say, for example, Adam Rishon, right? He just does a mitzvah, right? Let's say at the beginning he does the Avera. He does a chet, correct? He does a chet, and suddenly the Yetzirah becomes Dovet. The Sitrach becomes Dovet to his guf, and right, and the guf descends at Madreg in its chomrius, and so on. And let's say after that he then does another mitzvah. What happens is a light goes down, but that new light is in trouble. Why? It's in trouble in two ways. First of all, now around the neshama there's a klipa, which means that even though the neshama has a new light, right? Right, a new light, that light can't radiate out of that klipa. You see what I'm saying? Because there's a shell around it. You see what I'm saying? So the Zehiris will not go out. That's number one.
It absorbs the light, but it can't radiate it out.
It won't radiate out. We won't talk about the mechanics of that. It won't radiate out. That's number one. And even if it could radiate it out, there's another problem. The guf cannot become nizachich from it. It cannot receive it. Why? Because there's an impurity in the guf. You see, there's a tumor which resides in the guf. So even if the light goes in, it cannot raise it. The neshama has a koyach of raising the guf, the substance of the guf, a substance which is neutral. You see what I'm saying? Which doesn't have tum in it. It's neutral. It has a certain gashmius because of the fact that it was created far away from the Bonashah in that sense. But once the tumor goes in, that all cannot do anything with it. You see what I'm saying? So it's impossible to mazachit the guf now. You see what I'm saying? So there's a big fix now. The Bonashah says, even if I let you get another mitzvah and I let you have more oris, you cannot do what you were supposed to do. You cannot be mazachit and go to Olam Haba. You no longer can go. You can no longer create your Olam Haba. You see what I'm saying? What? Even with tshuva, it's not so simple anymore. Wait a minute.
Is this in terms of being a gzera because in the neshama in its primal state probably not for this too?
Yeah, it's a gzera, but I won't go into the reasons for the gzera. There's a klipa on the neshama and there's a tumor in the guf, in the bria. You see. There's nothing that exists yet. According to Hanagas but he's finished. He's made it impossible for him to go into Olam Haba. That's it. His guf is finished. You see. That's what it is. Because you have to remember one thing. The Bonashim gave Adam one mitzvah. And that one mitzvah could either do one of two effects. You mean? Once he blew that one mitzvah, he damaged it. And that's it. There was no way. So even if the Bonashim gave him another chance, the Mishpat says, finish, forget it. He gave him one mitzvah. His gvul, this man, you said there has to be a limit. There's one Nisayan to accomplish either objective. He failed. You see, one of the two.
Why do you have to have both sides? Does that make the mitzvah din stronger?
No, for yichud. I don't want to go. I'm not going to go into why you have to have these both sides yet.
Well, why can't it just be a one side of the coin? If he does the mitzvah, he removes the obstruction of the goof. If he doesn't, the goof remains. Why does the goof have to get worse, both in the chumriyas and in the neshama has to have the cloud, and the goof has to have also 2 minutes? Why does it have to go on that side?
That has to do with Anagas HaYichud. I know that's way down the line.
You don't think it has anything to do with Anagas HaMishpat?
No.
Does it intensify the mitzvah din?
It has to do with Anagas HaYichud.
If it wouldn't have,
it has to do
with
that.
It would be a kilkel on the side of Bachar Bara. So the mitzvah din, the Anagas HaMishpat also would be lighter stuff.
No, it's not necessarily.
It would be such a heavy number.
No, because Mishpat would have manifested up some other way. This is Yichud working, but I don't want to go into that. That's nothing. What it is, therefore, the following. The following is thing on. So therefore, not only did Adam fail to be Mazachich his guf, not only did Adam fail to be Mazachich his guf, but he introduced a kilkul into the whole guf. And he's makalkal himself. You see what I'm saying? So he failed to do two things, right? He failed, first of all, to be Mazachich his guf up, and by failing to go up, he not only failed to go up, but he went down.
There's only one way out, is that step.
What?
The only way out is the step.
Why?
What do you have to
Because it removes the goof. It removes the goof.
Wait. 1 second.
Why do you have to stick it out for now for years?
Let's understand what Tachnas of Death is. 1 second. Hold on.
What do we have to stick on the sacred town?
What? Whatever.
He gave it 70
He's talking about Zion today.
What's the tachlis of death? Because what it is like this. Since Adam has already been makakal as guf, it's a terrible thing that's happened with kilkal haguf. What has happened? Before, the guf was a neutral substance, right? And the Yetzer Hara was able to influence man through it. You know what I mean? Through that substance, the koyach was able to, seduce man. But once he did the chet, then that force what actually became part of that substance. You see the difference? So that the Yetzer Hara now resides in the guf. There's a difference. And that's what that's what it means by Adam Rishon. If you notice, the Yetzer Hara is represented by the Nachash. Now, the Nachash was what? The Nachash was an animal, was a real animal, but it was able to talk and so on. The Yetzer Hara the Nachash was not the Yetzer Hara himself. The Yetzer Hara, I told you, is a malach. As a malach, he's a ruchni, he's the koyach. However, the Yetzer Hara, you see, in the time of Adam Rishon, before the Chet, was personified in an actual being called the Nachash. No longer is it personified by a being. It was personified by a being called the Nachash. The Nachash was similar to our Nachash, but not exactly the same, because he had feet. There was a lot of other things on him. But it was a certain kind of animal in the animal kingdom, which was different than all other animals. And it had feet, it also had a mind and it had seichel. And it had the ability to provide the arguments which were necessary to seduce the person. You see, that's how this was the shliach, or the personification of that spiritual koyach called the Yetzer Hara. You see what I'm saying? When Adam did the chet, it was changed. Now that Nachash is outside of Adam. You ever notice does the Yetzer Hara come to you? How? You ever hear someone talking to you on the outside and saying, here's a food, do a chet? No. It's in your head, isn't it? It's not outside of you. Adam Rishon before the chet, it was outside. It was a Nachash talking to him. You see what I'm saying? It was outside. That was the Yetzer Hara. He had no Yetzer Hara in his body. There was no one talking to him from his lave, from his mind. It was someone outside that was able to influence him through the guf, but it didn't reside in him. Once he did the chet, then that Nachash disappeared. It became an ordinary snake, and the personification of the Sitra Achra was gone, and it entered into the guf itself. The force itself became part of the Bria. You see what I'm saying? That's why before it was represented as Nachash. After that, it was never represented as anything after that. Now, what happens if it's part of the guf? That's the kilkul that he introduced. So therefore, what introduced the kilkul? So what? So therefore, the following. In order for the Baruch to give Adam another chance, what he had to do was first the following. He had to take this guf and take away first the kilkul and restore it back up to the madrega of a neutral guf. You see what I'm saying? And then give Adam the chance of taking the neutral guf and raising it up to the. You see what I'm saying?
That happens first when you die?
Wait. The motion was the following. When the Baruch created the body, right? The body was not created opaque. This is very important to follow now. When the Baruch created Adam, you see, and this is a very, very big yesod, a very important thing to understand who Adam Rishon was. Everyone thinks that Adam Rishon was like us. That's not true. His body was very different than our body. When Adam Rishon was created, he had a body, right? But that